March 7, 1943. North Atlantic, 420 nautical miles southeast of Cape Farewell, Greenland. Kapitän-Leutnant Hans-Joachim Schwantke stood in the conning tower of U-43, binoculars pressed against his eyes, scanning the horizon for the convoy his headquarters had promised would be there. The wind cut through his leather jacket with Atlantic cruelty, but Schwantke barely noticed. He was hunting. His boat had been at sea for 18 days, transiting from Lorient through the Bay of Biscay, across the western approaches, into these grey waters, where Allied convoys carried the lifeblood of Britain's war effort. Tonight, under cover of darkness and heavy weather, he would strike. The intelligence brief from WWII, Admiral Dönitz's U-boat headquarters, had been specific. Convoy HX-229, approximately 50 merchant ships with minimal escort, would pass through this sector between March 6th and 8th. Schwantke's orders were clear: shadow the convoy, report its position, coordinate with other boats in Wolfpack Raufgraf, then attack. It was the doctrine that had brought Germany to the brink of victory in the tonnage war. The mathematics seemed inescapable. If U-boats could sink merchant ships faster than Allied shipyards could replace them, Britain would starve, and America's armies would never reach Europe. But something had changed in recent months, something Schwantke and his fellow commanders discussed in terse radio messages and worried conversations when boats rendezvoused at sea. American destroyers, particularly the new destroyer, escorts the Allies were producing in staggering numbers, had become unnaturally effective at finding U-boats. Not just surfaced boats that radar could detect, though that was deadly enough. These American ships seemed to know where U-boats were even when submerged, even in conditions where visual detection should be impossible. Schwantke had heard the stories. Boats running on the surface at night in heavy weather, conditions that should provide complete concealment, suddenly illuminated by searchlights as destroyers appeared out of the darkness with impossible accuracy. Submarines attempting to shadow convoys from beyond visual range, forced to dive by escorts that somehow knew their exact position. Commander after commander reporting the same phenomenon. American destroyer escorts were finding them with precision that defied explanation. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The prevailing theory among U-boat commanders was that the Americans had improved their radar technology, perhaps developing systems that could detect submarines at greater ranges than German intelligence had assessed. But this didn't explain everything. Radar could find surfaced boats, certainly. The METOX radar detector that every U-boat carried should provide. Warning of radar emissions, giving commanders time to dive before aircraft or surface vessels could close to attack range. Yet increasingly, boats were being caught without warning. Either the METOX was failing to detect new radar frequencies, or the Americans had developed something entirely different. Schwantke's own experiences supported the growing sense of technological inferiority. On his previous patrol in January 1943, U-43 had been transiting the Bay of Biscay on a moonless night, running on the surface to recharge batteries. The METOX had given no warning. No engine noise, no searchlights, nothing to indicate an aircraft's approach, until suddenly depth charges were falling around the boat. Schwantke had ordered a crash dive with seconds to spare. The explosions had bracketed the diving submarine, causing severe damage that forced an emergency return to port. The after hydroplane had jammed. The starboard diesel engine had been knocked off its mounts by the concussion. 2 men had been injured when a deck plate came loose and struck them during the violent evasive maneuver. "We were blind," Schwantke had written in his war diary, the official record that U-boat commanders were required to maintain. The METOX gave no alarm. The aircraft appeared as if materialized from darkness itself. Only luck saved us. We heard the bombs falling and crash-dived with seconds to spare. Our detector should have warned us minutes in advance, giving us time to dive safely. Instead, we had no warning at all. Either the British have developed radar our detectors cannot sense, or they are using some other technology we do not understand. Whatever the explanation, we are being hunted by enemies we cannot detect until the moment of attack. That patrol report had been one of dozens, flooding into U-boat headquarters throughout late 1942 and early 19. 43. The pattern was unmistakable. Allied detection capabilities had improved dramatically over a very short period, suggesting new technology rather than improved tactics or training. Admiral Dönitz had convened emergency meetings with Germany's top scientists and naval intelligence officers, demanding explanations for the mysterious losses. The discussions had revealed disturbing ignorance about Allied capabilities and troubling complacency about German technological superiority. Now, in March 1943, Schwantke was back at sea with a repaired boat and orders to attack the convoy that intelligence insisted was approaching his position. He studied the horizon through his binoculars, searching for the telltale smoke that would indicate a large formation of merchant ships. The weather was cooperating, at least. Heavy clouds obscured the moon. Visibility was perhaps 3,000 meters, not enough for visual detection at the ranges where he planned to operate. The sea state was rough enough to make spotting a low-profile submarine conning tower difficult, but not so violent that it would interfere with torpedo attacks. Herr Kaleu, the voice of Oberleutnant zur See Werner Henke, U-43's first watch officer, called up from the control room below. Hydrophone contact bearing 045, multiple propeller signatures, heavy machinery noise, range estimated 12 to 15 kilometers. Schwantke felt his pulse quicken. This was it. The convoy. He pressed the bridge intercom button. Classification? Heavy merchant traffic, Henke responded. Estimate 20 to 30 separate contacts. No destroyer signatures detected yet, but they could be masked by the merchant noise. Schwantke made his decision instantly. Clear the bridge. Prepare to dive. We'll approach submerged to periscope depth, close to attack range, surface when we have firing solutions. This was standard doctrine. A U-boat's greatest advantage was surprise. Approaching underwater minimized the chance of detection. Once in position, the boat would surface to use its superior surface speed and deck gun if necessary. Fire torpedoes at close range, then dive again before escorts could respond effectively. The lookouts scrambled down the ladder into the control room. Schwantke took one last look at the dark horizon, then followed them down, pulling the hatch shut behind him and dogging it tight. Dive to 15 meters, he ordered. Silent running, hydrophone bearing to target. U-43's bow angled down as the chief engineer flooded ballast tanks and adjusted trim. The boat was a Type 7C, the workhorse of the U-boat fleet. 220 feet long, displacing 769 tons surfaced, these submarines had been designed as commerce raiders, optimized for range and torpedo capacity rather than underwater performance. On the surface, U-43 could make 17 knots using diesel engines. Submerged, running on electric motors powered by massive batteries, maximum speed was 7.6 knots. But this could only be sustained for brief periods before battery depletion forced the boat to surface and recharge. For prolonged underwater operations, the standard procedure was to maintain 4 knots or less, conserving power, while remaining maneuverable enough to press an attack or evade detection. The control room settled into the practiced routine of silent running. All non-essential equipment was shut down to minimize electrical load and mechanical noise. Men moved carefully, avoiding any sound that might travel through the hull and be detected by enemy hydrophones. The ventilation system ran at reduced capacity, saving power but causing the temperature inside the boat to climb steadily. Within an hour, it would be 35 degrees Celsius or more. The crew would strip to the waist, their skin slick with sweat, but no one would complain. This was the price of the hunt. Schwantke moved to the hydrophone station, where Funkmat Wolfgang Hirschfeld, the senior radio operator, sat with headphones pressed against his ears, eyes closed in concentration. Hirschfeld was an experienced operator, capable of distinguishing individual ship propellers by the subtle variations in their acoustic signatures. He could identify destroyer types by engine rhythms, estimate range by sound intensity, and track multiple contacts simultaneously. "Report," Schwantke said quietly. Hirschfeld opened his eyes. "Convoy bearing steady at 045, range now 10 kilometers. I count at least 25 distinct propeller signatures, all heavy merchant ships by their sound. Liberty ships mostly, I think, American construction. They have a distinctive engine noise. He paused, listening intently. And escorts. At least 3, possibly 4. They're on the convoy's flanks and rear, running back and forth. Standard screening pattern. Type? Difficult to say, Herr Callot. The merchant noise masks their signatures. But based on engine rhythms and propeller characteristics, I'd estimate American destroyer escorts, the new ones we've been briefed about. Schwantke nodded slowly. The Fletcher-Class destroyers and their smaller cousin, the destroyer escort variants the Americans were mass-producing, had become the backbone of Allied convoy protection. American shipyards were completing these vessels at a rate that seemed impossible to German naval intelligence analysts. 2 or 3 ships every week, each equipped with the latest detection equipment, anti-submarine weapons, and radar systems. The statistics were daunting. By March 1943, the United States had commissioned over 50 Fletcher-Class destroyers with hundreds more under construction or planned. The destroyer escort program was even larger, with production goals that exceeded 100 ships by year's end. What made these ships particularly dangerous was not just their numbers, but their capabilities. They were fast, capable of 24 to 30 knots. Fast, enough to run down a surfaced U-boat. They carried sophisticated sonar systems that could detect submerged submarines. They were armed with depth charges, hedgehog anti-submarine mortars, and in some cases, ahead-throwing weapons that could attack a submarine while maintaining sonar contact. Most critically, they carried radar systems that German intelligence was only beginning to understand. "Continue tracking," Schwantke ordered. "I want range updates every 5 minutes. Alert me immediately if the escort pattern changes or if any vessel appears to be moving toward our position." He moved to the chart table where Henke had plotted the convoy's course and the U-boat's position. The tactical situation was developing exactly as planned. The convoy was maintaining a steady northeastward course at approximately 8 knots, standard for heavily laden merchant ships. U-43 was positioned on the convoy's port beam, slightly ahead. By maintaining 4 knots on an intercept course, Schwantke could close to attack range within 90 minutes, surface, and fire torpedoes before the escorts could respond effectively. The plan was sound. It followed doctrine that had worked hundreds of times in previous engagements. German U-boats had been sinking Allied merchant ships using these exact tactics since the war's first days. The convoy system, Britain's primary defence against submarine attack, provided some protection by concentrating merchant ships where escorts could defend them. But it also created target-rich environments where a single U-boat could potentially sink multiple ships in rapid succession. The mathematics of commerce warfare favoured the attacker. A U-boat carried 14 torpedoes. If even half of those struck targets, one submarine could sink 7 merchant ships, totaling perhaps 40,000 tons of shipping. The loss of the U-boat itself, while tragic for its crew, represented an acceptable exchange from Germany's strategic perspective. But something had changed in recent months. The exchange rate, once heavily in Germany's favour, was shifting. In November 1942, German U-boats had sunk approximately 119 merchant ships, totaling 729,000 tons worldwide, losing 13 submarines in return. By January 1943, sinkings had dropped to 37 ships, while U-boat losses climbed to 7. February's preliminary statistics were even worse. 34 merchant ships sunk and 17 U-boats lost. The trend line was unmistakable and catastrophic. Schwantke had studied these statistics during the pre-patrol briefings at Lorient. The numbers told a story of technological shift, of Allied detection capabilities improving faster than German countermeasures could adapt. The question that haunted every U-boat commander was simple. What had changed? Why were boats that should be effectively invisible when submerged being detected and destroyed with increasing frequency? The answer, though Schwantke did not yet know it, was currently mounted on the mast of USS Borry, a Clemson-class destroyer operating as escort for convoy HX-229. The destroyer's SG surface search radar, operating at 3000 MHz with a wavelength of 10 centimeters, could detect a surfaced submarine at ranges exceeding 20 statute miles under optimal conditions. More critically, the radar could detect a submarine's periscope or conning tower at ranges of 5 to 7 miles, giving escort commanders warning long before the submarine could close to torpedo range. The SG radar represented a revolutionary advance in naval detection technology. Earlier radar systems, operating at longer wavelengths, had been useful for detecting large targets like ships or aircraft, but lacked the resolution to pick up small targets like submarine conning towers, especially in heavy seas where wave clutter created false returns. The SG system, using centimetric wavelengths enabled by cavity magnetron technology, could distinguish genuine targets from sea clutter with unprecedented clarity. An experienced radar operator could detect a submarine periscope breaking the surface at ranges that made visual detection impossible. What made this technology particularly devastating for U-boats was that German radar warning receivers, including the METOX system that Schwantke trusted to provide warning of Allied radar, could not detect these centimetric frequencies. The METOX operated in the meter wavelength range, designed to warn of earlier Allied radar systems operating around 1.5 meters. The SG radar's 10 centimeter wavelength was 17 times shorter, a frequency completely outside the METOX's detection capability. German U-boats were running blind into an electromagnetic environment where they could be seen but could not detect they were being observed. Aboard USS Boree, Lieutenant Commander Charles Hutchins stood on the bridge wing, studying the darkened horizon through his binoculars. His ship was one of 4 escorts, protecting HX-229, a slow convoy of 43 merchant ships carrying American tanks, trucks, ammunition, and supplies to Britain. The convoy had departed New York 8 days earlier and was now approaching the most dangerous phase of its journey, the mid-Atlantic Gap, where U-boats from French bases could operate beyond the range of land-based air cover. Hutchins was 42 years old, a career naval officer who had commanded destroyers in the Atlantic for 18 months. He had learned anti-submarine warfare through hard experience, absorbing lessons paid for in lost ships and drowned men. The early months of 1942 had been catastrophic for Allied shipping. German U-boats had operated almost with impunity along the American East Coast during Operation Drumbeat, sinking tankers and freighters within sight of American beaches. The disaster had been compounded by American unwillingness to implement convoy systems, inadequate anti-submarine training, and technological deficiencies in detection equipment. But by early 1943, the situation had transformed. American shipyards were producing escort vessels faster than U-boats could sink them. Training programs had matured, producing skilled anti-submarine warfare specialists. Most critically, new detection technologies were providing escort commanders with capabilities that U-boat commanders did not yet understand. The SG radar was the centerpiece of this technological advantage. Bridge, radar. The voice of Ensign Robert Matthews crackled through the intercom. Matthews was the ship's radar officer, a 23-year-old Annapolis graduate who had trained extensively on the new SG system before Boree departed New York. Hutchins pressed the intercom button. Bridge, go ahead. Sir, I have a surface contact bearing 270, range 21,000 yards. Target is small, moving slowly. Classify as a possible submarine. 21,000 yards, 12 statute miles. Hutchins felt his pulse quicken. The radar had detected something at a range where visual identification would be impossible even in daylight, let alone on this dark night with heavy weather. Can you confirm it's not a merchant vessel? Negative, sir. The radar cross-section is too small for any merchant ship, and the target's speed is approximately 8 knots, faster than our convoy but slower than any escort would be traveling independently. Based on size and speed, I assess probable submarine contact. Hutchins made his decision instantly. Sound general quarters. All ahead flank. Come left to heading 270. Sonar. Commence active search on that bearing. Radio, alert convoy, Commodore and other escorts. We're prosecuting a possible submarine contact. Throughout USS Boree, klaxons blared and men ran to battle stations. The destroyer's turbines howled as Engineering answered the flank speed order. The ship heeled into a turn, her bow coming around to point directly at the contact 12 miles distant. In the sonar shack, operators activated their equipment and began sweeping the waters ahead, listening for the distinctive echo that would confirm a submarine. Hutchins understood the tactical picture with perfect clarity. If the contact was indeed a U-boat, and he believed it was, the submarine was probably attempting to reach the attack position on the convoy. The boat would likely be running on the surface, using its diesel engines for maximum speed while recharging batteries. Standard U-boat doctrine called for approaching convoys, then diving to attack from periscope depth before surfacing again to escape at high speed after firing torpedoes. The key was to force the submarine to dive before it could reach attack range. A surfaced U-boat could make 17 knots. Bori could make 35. The mathematics were inexorable. Hutchins's destroyer would close the range before the U-boat could threaten the convoy. Once forced underwater, the submarine's speed would drop to less than 8 knots, eliminating its ability to catch the convoy. And if Hutchins could maintain contact long enough, his sonar and depth charges would destroy the threat permanently. Range to target? Hutchins called the radar operator. 19,000 yards and closing, sir. Target course appears steady. No indication they've detected us. This was the advantage the SG radar provided. Hutchins could track the submarine from ranges where the U-boat's lookouts could not possibly see his destroyer, especially in these weather conditions. He could plan his attack, position his ship, and close to weapons range before the submarine commander knew danger was approaching. The electromagnetic spectrum had become a battlefield where American technology provided overwhelming superiority. Aboard U-43, Captain Lieutenant Schwantke reviewed his attack plan with growing confidence. The hydrophone contacts remained steady. The convoy was maintaining course and speed, no indication of unusual activity from the escorts. Everything was proceeding as planned. In 40 minutes, he would order the boat to surface. In 50 minutes, he would be in position to fire torpedoes. By dawn, several Allied merchant ships would be on the bottom, and U-43 would be racing away, too fast for the lumbering escorts to catch. Herr Kalou, Hirschfeld's voice cut through the control room's quiet tension. Hydrophone contact, single screw, high-speed turbines, bearing 275. Range. He paused, listening intently. Range closing rapidly. Estimate 8 kilometers and decreasing. Schwantke felt ice form in his stomach. An escort, moving at high speed directly toward his position. But how? U-43 was submerged, running silent. There should be no way for the escort to know the submarine's location, unless… Range? He demanded. 6 kilometers now. Herr Kalou, he's heading straight for us. No deviation. He knows exactly where we are. Every man understood what this meant. Somehow, impossibly, the American destroyer escort had detected a submerged submarine running silent at a range where detection should be impossible. Either German intelligence assessments of Allied sonar capabilities were catastrophically wrong, or the Americans possessed some other detection technology entirely. Schwantke had seconds to make a decision that would determine whether his crew lived or died. If he maintained current course and depth, the destroyer would be overhead in minutes, dropping depth charges. If he went deep, maximum depth of 220 meters, he might evade immediate attack, but would lose the convoy entirely. His batteries could not sustain high-speed evasion for long enough to escape a determined pursuit. If he surfaced and ran, he would expose his boat to gunfire, but at least he could use maximum speed to try to escape. Blow all ballast tanks, Schwantke ordered. Surface. Both diesels ahead full. Prepare deck gun crew. We're going to run. U-43's bow angled sharply upward as compressed air forced water from ballast tanks. The submarine burst through the surface in a cloud of spray, her conning tower emerging into the night air. Diesel engines roared to life, their exhaust bellowing black smoke as the boat accelerated. Schwantke scrambled up the ladder and burst onto the bridge, binoculars already in his eyes, searching for the threat he knew was coming. There, bearing 275. A dark shape against the horizon, perhaps 5 kilometers distant now. The white bone of the bow wave is visible even in darkness, an American destroyer heading straight for U-43 at flank speed. And even as Schwantke watched, a searchlight blazed from the destroyer's bridge, its beam reaching across the water to illuminate the bridge, surfaced U-boat with perfect accuracy. "Hard left rudder!" Schwantke shouted into the bridge intercom. "Diesels ahead! Emergency full!" Deck gun crew to battle stations. U-43 heeled into a turn, her diesels straining to push the boat to maximum speed. But Schwantke already knew it was hopeless. The destroyer was too close, too fast. Within minutes, it would be in gun range. U-43's 88mm deck gun might get a few shots off, but the destroyer mounted 5-inch guns that could devastate the submarine's thin hull. And behind that destroyer, other escorts would be racing to join the attack. The tactical situation had collapsed with stunning speed. 30 minutes earlier, Schwantke had been positioning for an attack that should have sunk multiple merchant ships. Now he was fighting for survival against an enemy that had detected his submarine through methods he did not understand. The technology gap was not merely significant, it was war-changing. And U-boat commanders like Schwantke were dying because they did not yet comprehend how completely the electromagnetic battlefield had shifted against them. This was the reality of 1943 in the North Atlantic. German U-boats, which had brought Britain to the brink of starvation in 1942, were being systematically hunted and destroyed by Allied forces equipped with radar and sonar technologies that German engineering had not matched. The Fletcher-Class destroyers and their destroyer escort cousins were not merely ships, they were floating sensor platforms that could see through darkness and detect submarines at ranges that made conventional evasion impossible. The confrontation between Schwantke's U-43 and Hutchins's USS Bory represented more than a single tactical engagement. It was a collision between German submarine doctrine developed in the 1920s and 30s and American detection technology developed in the early 1940s. It was the moment when German submariners' confidence in their invulnerability began to shatter against the reality of Allied electromagnetic superiority. And it was the beginning of a psychological transformation that would haunt every U-boat crew for the remainder of the war. What Schwantke could not know, as USS Bory's searchlight held his submarine pinned like an insect on a board, was that his experience would be repeated hundreds of times over the coming months. U-boat after U-boat would be detected at impossible ranges, forced to surface by depth charges delivered with uncanny accuracy, destroyed by escorts that seemed to possess supernatural ability to locate submarines regardless of weather, darkness, or evasive maneuvers. The technology that made this possible, cavity magnetron radar operating at centimetric wavelengths, would prove more decisive than any weapon system, any tactical doctrine, any strategic decision in determining the outcome of the Battle of the Atlantic. The German submarine service, which had nearly won the war in 1942, would lose 41 boats in May 1943 alone. The exchange rate would collapse from favourable to catastrophic. And throughout this transformation, U-boat commanders would file increasingly desperate patrol reports describing an enemy that could see them when they should be invisible, that knew their positions when detection should be impossible, that hunted them with technology against which Germany had no effective defence. The story of how American destroyers came to possess this overwhelming advantage, how Fletcher-Class radar systems came to dominate the Atlantic battlefield, and how German submariners' mockery of American technological capabilities transformed into recognition of catastrophic inferiority, would become one of World War II's most significant technological narratives. It was a story written in electromagnetic wavelengths that German detectors could not sense, in radar, returns that revealed submarines 20 miles distant, and in the psychological destruction of men who discovered too late that the ocean no longer hid them from enemies equipped with eyes that could see through darkness itself. The searchlight from USS Bory held U-43 in its merciless glare as the destroyer closed at 35 knots. Schwantke gripped the bridge, watching his death approach with the detachment that comes from recognizing inevitable defeat. His deck gun crew had managed to get off 3 shots before Bory's 5-inch guns opened fire. The American gunnery was devastatingly accurate. The first salvo straddled U-43, sending geysers of water crashing over the conning tower. The second salvo struck home, The forward shell penetrated the pressure hull just aft of the torpedo room, the explosion tearing through the boat's interior and killing 6 men instantly. The second shell struck the conning tower itself, demolishing the bridge structure and wounding Schwantke and both his lookouts. The third shell missed, but the damage was catastrophic. U-43 was flooding forward, her bow dropping as seawater poured through the hull breach. "Abandon ship," Schwantke shouted through the bridge voice tube, his words slurred by the blood filling his mouth from shattered teeth. "All hands abandon ship." But it was already too late for most of the crew. The submarine's bow was underwater now, the stern rising at an increasingly steep angle as the forward compartments flooded. Men were scrambling out of the conning tower hatch, but the boat was going down faster than they could escape. Schwantke watched from the tilting bridge as U-43 slid beneath the waves. The entire engagement, from detection to destruction, had lasted 11 minutes. USS Boris slowed and began rescue operations, picking up survivors from the oil-slicked water. Of U-43's crew of 47 men, 16 survived to be pulled from the Atlantic. Captain Lieutenant Schwantke was among them, though he would die from his wounds 3 days later in Boris' sick bay. His last words to Lieutenant Commander Hutchins, spoken through a translator, would be recorded in the destroyer's log. "How did you find us?" "We were submerged, running silent. Your radar cannot see through water." Hutchins had looked at the dying German commander with something approaching sympathy. "Our radar found you on the surface before you dove. We tracked your position throughout your approach. You were never invisible to us." This exchange, documented in USS Boris' action report dated March 7, 1943, captured the fundamental misunderstanding that would cost Germany the Battle of the Atlantic. U-boat commanders believed their submarines became invisible when submerged. They understood that Allied radar could detect surfaced boats, but assumed that diving provided sanctuary from electronic detection. What they failed to comprehend was that modern radar systems could detect submarines at ranges so extreme that U-boats could be tracked continuously from the moment they approached a convoy's defensive perimeter. By the time the submarine dove, its position was already known. Escorts could vector directly to that position and commence sonar prosecution before the submarine could maneuver to safety. The technological revolution that made this possible had its origins not in American laboratories, but in British research facilities, working desperately to counter the U-boat threat. In Birmingham, England, in February 1940, physicists John Randall and Harry Boot had developed the cavity magnetron, a device that could generate microwave frequencies at power levels previously thought impossible. This copper block, barely 10 centimeters in diameter, represented a quantum leap in radar technology. Earlier radar systems operated at wavelengths measured in meters. These long wavelength systems could detect large targets, like ships or aircraft, but lacked the resolution to distinguish small targets like submarine conning towers from sea clutter. The cavity magnetron enabled radar operation at wavelengths measured in centimeters. This dramatic frequency increase provided proportional improvements in resolution and target discrimination. A centimetric radar system could detect a submarine periscope at ranges of 5 to 7 miles, a conning tower at 20 miles, and could do so in sea states and weather conditions that would blind longer wavelength systems. The British government, recognizing the strategic importance of this technology, made the extraordinary decision in September 1940 to share it with the United States. The Tizard mission, led by physicist Henry Tizard, carried cavity magnetron prototypes to America along with complete technical documentation. The decision was controversial. Sharing Britain's most advanced military technology risked enemy acquisition if the devices were captured. But British leaders understood that only American industrial capacity could produce these systems in the quantities needed to win the Atlantic battle. American engineers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Radiation Laboratory took the British cavity magnetron and transformed it from laboratory curiosity into a production weapon system. By early 1942, the first SG surface search radar sets were being installed on American destroyers and destroyer escorts rolling off production lines. By mid-1943, virtually every Allied escort vessel in the Atlantic carried centimetric radar. The technological advantage was overwhelming, and German intelligence had completely failed to assess its impact. The German Navy's Technical Intelligence Organization, the Beobachtung-Dienst, or B-Dienst, had detected Allied radar signals and knew the British and Americans were developing improved systems. But German scientists, working from theoretical principles and limited captured equipment, had concluded that centimetric radar offered no significant tactical advantage. The power requirements seemed prohibitive. The precision manufacturing needed appeared beyond practical implementation for mass production. German radar experts assured Admiral Dönitz that while the Allies might develop experimental centimetric systems, they could not possibly field them in operationally significant numbers. This assessment proved catastrophically wrong. By March 1943, when U-43 encountered USS Borry, American shipyards had produced over 200 escort vessels equipped with SG radar. British shipyards had equipped hundreds of corvettes and frigates with Type 271 radar, another centimetric system derived from cavity magnetron technology. The Allied radar network covering convoy routes had become so comprehensive that U-boats could barely approach within torpedo range without detection. The psychological impact on U-boat crews was profound and devastating. Men who had entered the war as confident hunters found themselves transformed into hunted prey. The ocean, which had seemed an infinite hiding place, had become transparent to enemies equipped with electronic eyes. Every patrol became a nightmare of detection, evasion, and death. Oberleutnant Zur C. Herbert Werner, serving as watch officer aboard U-230 in late 1943, recorded the transformation in his private journal. The entries, discovered decades after the war, provide insight into the mental state of U-boat crews confronting technological superiority they could not understand or counter. April 15, 1943. Departed La Police for patrol in the North Atlantic. Crew morale is low despite official optimism. Everyone knows the statistics. 41 boats were lost in May, the highest casualties of any month since war began. We are told new tactics and equipment will restore our effectiveness. No one believes this. The Americans detect us at ranges we cannot explain. Their destroyers appear with impossible frequency given the vast ocean areas involved. We dive and hide, but they find us anyway. April 23rd. Convoy contacted 200 miles south of Iceland. Approached the attack position submerged. Before we could close to torpedo range, 2 destroyer escorts appeared on intercept course, forced to dive deep and rig for depth charge attack. They held sonar contact for 8 hours. Precise, relentless. We changed course, changed depth, released Pillenwerfer decoys. Nothing worked. Finally, they broke off, perhaps out of depth charges. We survived, but fired no torpedoes. This patrol is already a failure. May 2nd. Another convoy, another detection before we could attack. This time an aircraft appeared despite heavy weather that should have grounded patrols. We were caught on the surface at night. Their searchlight found us instantly. We crashed with seconds to spare. Depth charges bracketed us. Minor damage, major psychological impact. The crew is terrified. We cannot see our hunters, cannot fight them, can only run and hide like animals pursued by predators. May 9th. Radio message from Badoo. 23 boats lost this month so far. The casualty rate is unsustainable. If this continues, the entire U-boat force will be destroyed by summer, yet we are ordered to continue operations. Attack the convoys, disrupt Allied shipping, fight on despite the losses. It is madness. We are being sacrificed to technology we do not possess and cannot counter. Werner's journal entries reflected the reality that was becoming inescapable to U-boat crews by mid-1943. The technological balance had shifted decisively against Germany. The radar systems mounted on Fletcher-Class destroyers and other Allied escorts provided such overwhelming detection advantages that conventional U-boat tactics had become obsolete. Boats could not approach convoys without being detected. They could not shadow targets from beyond visual range without radar tracking them. They could not surface at night to recharge batteries without risk of immediate air or surface attack. The Fletcher-Class destroyer itself represented American industrial and technological prowess in concentrated form. These ships, produced in quantities that seemed impossible to German planners, embodied the marriage of advanced detection technology and mass production that would ultimately decide the Atlantic battle. The first Fletcher-Class destroyer, USS Fletcher herself, had been commissioned in June 1942. By the end of 1943, over 100 Fletcher-Class destroyers would be in service with dozens more under construction. Each ship displaced 2,500 tons, measured 376 feet in length, and could make 35 knots sustained. They carried 5 5-inch dual-purpose guns capable of engaging surface or air targets, 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, depth charge racks, and Hedgehog anti-submarine mortars. But their most important armament was invisible to the eye: the SG radar mounted on a platform atop the forward mast. The SG radar system consisted of several integrated components working in concert. The antenna, a parabolic reflector approximately 3 feet wide, rotated continuously, sweeping a 360-degree arc around the ship. The transmitter, powered by a cavity magnetron, generated pulses of microwave energy at 3,000 MHz. Each pulse lasted approximately 1 microsecond and contained peak power of 50 kilowatts. These pulses radiated from the antenna, traveled at the speed of light until striking a target, then reflected back to the ship. The receiver detected these returning echoes and displayed them on a plan position indicator, or PPI scope. This circular cathode ray tube showed the ship at the center, with detected targets appearing as bright spots at their actual bearing and range. An experienced radar operator could interpret these displays with remarkable precision, distinguishing submarines from surface vessels, identifying target courses and speeds, tracking multiple contacts simultaneously. The system's performance exceeded anything German engineers had achieved. Maximum detection range against a surfaced submarine was approximately 23 miles under optimal conditions, though typical performance ranged from 15 to 20 miles depending on sea state and weather. Against a submarine periscope or snorkel, detection range dropped to 5 to 7 miles, still sufficient to provide warning long before the submarine could close to torpedo range. Even in heavy weather that would blind visual lookouts, the SG radar could maintain contact and track targets with minimal degradation. What made this technology particularly devastating was that it operated at frequencies German radar warning receivers could not detect. The METOX system that equipped every U-boat could detect radar emissions between 1.3 and 2.6 meter wavelengths. The SG radar operated at 10 centimeters, more than 13 times shorter than the METOX's lower detection limit. From a U-boat commander's perspective, Allied radar had become invisible. Submarines were being detected and tracked by emissions they could not sense, giving them no warning that they had been found until escorts appeared or depth charges began falling. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The German Navy's attempts to develop countermeasures revealed the technological gap's true extent. German radar research, which had been world-leading in the 1930s, had stagnated during the war years. Resources were diverted to other priorities. Scientists and engineers were scattered across multiple competing programs. Most critically, Germany lacked the industrial infrastructure and specialized materials needed for mass production of centimetric radar components. The cavity magnetron itself, that copper block which enabled the entire centimetric radar revolution, required precision machining to tolerances of a few microns. The resonant cavities had to be machined into solid copper blocks with extreme accuracy. The powerful permanent magnets required cobalt, a strategic material Germany could not obtain in sufficient quantities. Even if German engineers could replicate the British design, and they would eventually do so after capturing examples from downed aircraft, Germany lacked the production capacity to manufacture these devices in militarily significant numbers. German efforts to develop radar warning receivers that could detect centimetric frequencies faced similar constraints. The Naxos system, introduced in September 1943, could theoretically detect some centimetric radar emissions. But by the time Naxos entered service, Allied scientists had already developed 3-centimeter radar systems against which Naxos was blind. Germany was perpetually one generation behind, forever attempting to counter yesterday's threats, while new systems rendered their countermeasures obsolete. The human cost of this technological inferiority mounted with horrifying speed. May 1943, which would become known among U-boat crews as Black May, saw 41 submarines destroyed in the North Atlantic alone. The casualty rate exceeded 25% of operational boats, making it statistically certain that any U-boat departing on patrol would not return. Admiral Dönitz, watching the plot boards at U-boat headquarters in Paris, saw his carefully built submarine force being systematically destroyed faster than shipyards could replace it. On May 24, 1943, Dönitz made the most painful decision of his career. He drafted an order, temporarily withdrawing U-boats from the North Atlantic. The message, transmitted to every boat at sea, acknowledged what had been obvious to commanders for months. Allied detection capabilities had made conventional U-boat operations unsustainable. "We are facing a situation where enemy attempts to restrict our operations have succeeded," Dönitz wrote in his war diary. "Their sea and air anti-submarine forces have increased enormously. Our losses have become unsustainable. We must withdraw temporarily until improved detection equipment and enhanced defensive capabilities can be developed." The withdrawal was portrayed as temporary, a tactical adjustment rather than strategic defeat. But U-boat crews understood the truth. The Battle of the Atlantic, which Germany had nearly won in 1942, had been lost. American destroyers, equipped with cavity magnetron radar, operating in coordination with aircraft carrying similar systems, had created a detection network that U-boats could not evade. The ocean, which had seemed Germany's greatest strategic asset, had become a killing ground where submarines were hunted to extinction. For German submariners who survived the war, the memory of those months haunted them for decades. The sound of destroyer propellers was heard through a submarine's hull, growing louder as the hunter closed on its prey. The metallic ping of active sonar striking steel, announcing that the enemy knew exactly where you were. The splash of depth charges entering the water overhead, followed by seconds of terrible waiting before the explosions. These sensory memories, burned into consciousness through repeated trauma, never faded entirely. Korvettenkapitän Peter Kremer, who commanded U-333 through multiple successful patrols, recorded his experiences in a memoir published as U-Boat Commander in 1984. His account of a patrol in June 1943, shortly after Dönitz's withdrawal order, captured the psychological devastation that technological inferiority inflicted on even experienced commanders. "We were ordered to patrol off the African coast, seeking isolated targets away from heavy air coverage. Even there, Allied aircraft appeared with impossible frequency given the vast ocean areas involved. On June 15th, we detected an enemy aircraft at extreme range with our new WWII radar warning receiver. I ordered an immediate dive to 150 meters and rigged for silent running. We stayed down 6 hours, far beyond safe operational limits. When we carefully surfaced to snorkel, recharging batteries and refreshing air, the same aircraft, or another, reappeared within minutes, forcing us down again. This pattern continued for 14 hours until our batteries were nearly exhausted. We had to surface or suffocate. When we broached, the aircraft was waiting, positioned perfectly for attack. Only frantic anti-aircraft fire and a crash dive that nearly imploded. Pressure hull saved us. We never fired a torpedo on that patrol. We spent 3 weeks attempting to evade detection long enough to attack anything. Allied mastery of the technological domain was so complete we could barely execute our basic mission. Kremer's experience was typical of U-boat operations from mid-1943 onward. Boats that ventured into operational areas found themselves immediately detected and hunted. The radar network was so comprehensive that submarines could barely surface without aircraft appearing. When they dove to hide, sonar-equipped escorts prosecuted them with depth charges and hedgehog mortars. The few boats that survived long enough to fire torpedoes discovered that Allied convoys were now so heavily protected that penetrating the escort screen meant almost certain detection and destruction. The statistics told a brutal story. In the first 3 weeks of May 1943, 96 U-boats were deployed in the North Atlantic. 41 were destroyed. The loss rate exceeded 40%, making U-boat service statistically more dangerous than any other military duty on either side. For comparison, the entire year of 1941 had seen 35 U-boat losses from all causes. Black May destroyed more submarines in 3 weeks than an entire year of early war operations. The exchange rate had become catastrophic. Each U-boat lost represented not just the material cost of the submarine itself, but the loss of trained crews that took months to replace. Experienced commanders, men who had survived multiple patrols and developed the tactical instincts needed for successful operations, were dying faster than training schools could produce replacements. New commanders were being sent to sea after abbreviated training, leading them into situations their inexperience could not handle. These boats died even faster, further accelerating the casualty spiral. Thank you for watching. For more detailed, historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.